Her name is Eleanor Vane, and she has never had a nightmare of her own. Instead, she receives them. A metallic taste fills her mouth as a new one arrives. Not a dream, but a raw, psychic imprint of pure terror. The air in her room grows thick and stale, smelling of distant ozone and the cold sweat of a stranger. She doesn't just see the nightmare, she feels the sticky dampness of a basement floor, hears the frantic scratching against a locked door from the other side. With a slow, deliberate motion, she types a title into her digital archive. Subject 7341, The Thing in the Walls. Someone, right now, is jolting awake, throat raw from a scream they don't remember making. Their horror is already fading. For Eleanor Vane, the collector, it is only just beginning. Quick cuts. A woman's pallid face emerges from shadow, eyes stark with terror. A child's crayon drawing shows a faceless shape pressed against a window pane. A leather-bound ledger slams shut, the sound final, releasing a puff of ancient dust. This is the story of Elara Vance. She remembers every nightmare ever dreamed. She is the archivist of our deepest fears. And tonight, the archive is leaking. Our story begins in Maple Creek, a perfect American suburb where every lawn is manicured and every smile is practiced. But beneath that polished surface, the air carried the faint, metallic scent of something old and forgotten. It was here that the first whispers from the archive began to seep through the cracks of reality. Autumn leaves, crisp underfoot, rustled with a sound like dry whispers. Sprinklers hissed a metronomic rhythm across suburban lawns. It was all painfully, unnervingly normal. Maple Creek, Ohio. Elara Vance cherished a place where nothing ever occurred. To her neighbors, she was merely the quiet woman at number 42, a freelance archivist, they presumed, a harmless keeper of old things, an assumption that mistook her profound stillness for simple solitude. She was always solitary, unnaturally pale, flinching at any sudden sound. The air around her carried a faint metallic scent, like old pennies. Her movements were stiff, as if the very atmosphere resisted her, and in quiet moments, you could hear a soft, rasping whisper, just on the edge of hearing. Elara's study was a tomb of stillness, its thick velvet curtains swallowing all sunlight. The shelves groaned not with books, but with a silent legion of those black, leather-bound ledgers. Elara, her movements precise, placed a fresh ledger upon the desk's worn surface. A faint scent of old paper and leather oil hung in the motionless air. She cracked the cover open. Every page stared back, utterly blank. This wasn't her domain. Elara didn't handle dusty manuscripts or forgotten records. Her archive was different. It was visceral. It was a collection not of words, but of experiences. She didn't read about fears. She remembered them vividly. The choking dread of the falling dream. It wasn't a story. It was a phantom weight, a sudden void in her gut. The memory of the drop was a taste of ozone and a soundless scream. The childhood closet's occupant, a skin-crawling presence that defied shape. The profound, existential void of a faceless, shifting crowd. These visions didn't feel like dreams. They invaded her sleep, sharp and visceral, as if she lived them herself. Her curse was to be the silent witness, forced to watch humanity's dark, collective subconscious unfold. Elara's hand quivers as she dips the antique fountain pen. She closes her eyes, and a single tear traces a path down her cheek. The air in the room grows thick and still, smelling faintly of old paper and ink. With a shaky breath, she begins to write in elegant, precise script. Dreamer, unknown, location, urban, theme, pursuit. For years, she managed it, cataloging, containing. The ledgers held the nightmares prisoner. The ink smelled of ozone and old rot, each entry a cold weight in her hands. But the pages grew damp, with a sticky, unnatural moisture that no sunlight could reach. And in the stillness, she heard the first whisper of a name trying to claw its way out. But an archive, no matter how well kept, can flood. A week later, Elara attempts to find comfort in a sitcom's canned laughter. The air in her living room feels thick and stale, carrying a faint, coppery scent. From the hallway, a soft, wet sound begins. A steady, rhythmic drip onto the hardwood floor. The laugh track cut out, its final notes twisting into something that sounded like choked-off screams. Then, absolute silence descended, thick and smothering. A damp, earthy smell, like cold soil and rot, crept into the air, and from deep within that wall came the sound. A faint, wet, deliberate scratching. It began subtly, auditory phantoms murmuring through the pipes, echoes of a 1987 nightmare about sentient plumbing. Then came the scent, ozone mixed with the acrid tang of singed hair. That odor was a signature, reported by a college student in Brighton who encountered a sleep paralysis demon. The air grew thick with dread, each sensory fragment weaving a tapestry of waking horror. Elara's nostrils flared as a familiar scent cut through the musty air. She lunged for a specific ledger, her fingers trembling as she pulled it from the shelf. Finding the entry, she gave a single, grim nod, her expression hardening into something cold and terrible. She could identify them. That was the only control she had left. But then, the nightmares began to manifest. Through the kitchen window, Elara saw something in the moonlit garden. A figure stood perfectly still by the bird bath, its outlines stark against the pale light. The air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and something metallic, like old copper. Its head was twisted at an unnatural angle, mirroring the broken-necked gardener from Ledger 73. She blinked, and the figure vanished. Only a deep depression remained in the sodden grass, steaming faintly in the cold. A faint, coppery scent of ozone lingered where it stood. The next morning, Elara's neighbor Mike leaned over the weathered fence, his friendly wave faltering as he took in her pallid face. "Morning, Elara," he called, his voice laced with concern. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Elara forced a thin smile that didn't reach her haunted eyes. "The scent of damp earth rising from the soil between you. Just a bad dream, Mike," she replied, her voice barely a whisper that seemed to get swallowed by the heavy morning air. It was the understatement of the century. The boundary between archive and reality was dissolving. The nightmares were tasting the air, and they were hungry. The manifestations grew stronger. Patches of her hallway wall felt spongy, like flesh under her fingertips. A child's voice sang a nursery rhyme from a famous mass nightmare event in 1993, the melody drifting through empty rooms. One night she woke to find her bedroom ceiling gone, replaced by an infinite, starless void from a philosopher's chronic nightmare. The air grew heavy with the scent of ozone and decay, as the house itself seemed to breathe around her. Elara pinched her arm until it bled, and the ceiling returned. She had become a focal point, a tear in the delicate fabric between the dreaming and waking worlds. In any horror story, there are always those who notice the tear, and they were already watching. Outside Elara's study, the storm howled with an unnatural fury, rattling the ancient window panes as a deep, resonant hum vibrated through the floorboards. The ledgers on their shelves trembled violently, their leather bindings emitting a faint scent of ozone and old paper, as if charged by the tempest. Her breath hitching, Elara scrambled to reinforce the archive, pressing cold iron keys relics from a witch-haunted dream against the quivering spines. She whispered words of banishment, stolen from a nightmare of exorcism, each syllable a desperate anchor against the rising tide in the room. She was wielding fear's own arsenal against it, a war fought with stolen weapons, and she was faltering. The air grew thick with the scent of ozone and old rot, a palpable dread clinging to the walls. Then, the doorbell rang. A sharp, normal sound pierced the chaos. She answered. It was Sarah, her neighbor from across the street, drenched and frightened. "Elara, thank God!" she cried, the words catching in her throat. "My power's out," she whispered, a metallic scent of ozone clinging to her soaked clothes. "Can I use your phone? And have you seen things in the storm? Shapes?" Elara's gaze drifted past Sarah, fixing on the rain-swept street. There, motionless as a tombstone, stood a tall, gaunt silhouette. It remained utterly still. No breath fog in the cold air, no blink against the stinging rain. The ozone tang of lightning mixed with something older, something like damp earth and forgotten stone. It was the exact, static memory from a dozen different nightmares about being watched. A figure of glitching, malevolent stillness. Elara's voice, low and urgent, cut through the oppressive quiet. "Come inside." Now, inside Elara's house, the air felt thick with the scent of old paper and something faintly metallic, like ozone after a storm. Sarah stood frozen in the doorway, her gaze locked on the room, her mind struggling to process the sheer volume of those strange, meticulous records. The low hum intensified, vibrating through the damp stone. Sarah's voice was a strained whisper. "What is all this?" Elara's reply was flat, final, a prison. The air grew thick with the ozone of raw power, and the inmates are breaking out. The ledger on the high shelf bursts open, pages erupt into the air, and as they flutter down, the ink seems to bleed into the paper. Shadows thicken and cool unnaturally. The temperature plummets, and a sharp, antiseptic scent of a hospital corridor permeates the space. Sarah's childhood nightmare made real. Sarah gasps, her breath catching in her throat. "No, that's my... How do you know that smell?" Elara's voice is a low whisper, laden with a terrible memory. "I remember it, just like I remember his." Her trembling finger extended toward the window, where the static man now stood at the end of her walkway. "And hers," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the steady drip of the flame. A small figure materialized there. A girl, her form dripping, with eyes like pools of ink. "They're not here for me," she breathed, the air thick with the scent of ozone and old paper. "They're here for the archive. To be remembered is to be real." They yearn for reality with a desperate intensity. The manifestations crowd in, their presence palpable. The very walls seem to inhale and exhale a damp, cold breath. Outside, the static man presses his face to the glass, his features flattening into a silent, distorted mask. Wet footprints materialized on the floorboards, creeping steadily closer. Sarah stood frozen, a familiar terror seizing her limbs. Elara's voice cut through the heavy air, clear and commanding. "You have to forget," she insisted. "Your nightmare." The hospital's antiseptic scent now carried the faint, metallic tang of iron. "You have to let it go." The cold, damp air clung to your skin like a shroud. Right now, a low, wet scratching sound echoed from somewhere down the corridor. Think of your son's laugh. A primal dread took hold, squeezing the thought from your mind. The rich alone was caught. A tangible anchor to reality. But if you cease to sustain it, the memory unravels you. Its form dissolves into the oppressive stillness. Elara turned, her gaze sweeping the shadow-cloaked room. Elara closed her eyes, not in fear, but with deliberate focus. She wasn't pushing the nightmares away. She was drawing them inward. A metallic tang, like ozone and old copper, filled the air around her. Elara had made her choice. She would not let the nightmares spill into Maple Creek. Elara would not let Sarah be consumed. She would seal the breach, even with herself still inside, her muscles locked in a final, desperate act. A sharp scent of ozone filled the air as the rift began to shudder. The cold seeped deep into her bones, a damp, clinging chill that promised oblivion. Every fiber of her being screamed to pull back, but she held fast. Her body went rigid. A final sacrifice etched in stillness as the breach sealed around her. She drank in the shrieking images, the raw sensations, the sheer, gut-twisting dread. The static man's form dissolved into a smeared, indistinct smear against the oppressive darkness. Beside him, the little girl's silhouette flickered like a dying candle, threatening to wink out. Then, the ledgers on the shelves slammed shut in a sudden, violent cascade. Each impact a percussive blast that shook the very air. The hum rose to a deafening pitch, then ceased, plunging the world into an absolute, unnatural silence. In Elara's study, the air grew thick and heavy, tasting faintly of ozone and old paper. The oppressive stillness was broken only by the frantic, too loud rhythm of her own heartbeat in her ears. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the tension shattered. The room was just a room again, still, quiet, and terrifyingly normal. The ledgers were merely books, mundane records that held no power. Sarah lay on the damp floorboards, sobbing with ragged relief as the storm's final echoes faded outside. The air in the room grew heavy with the scent of ozone and old paper, a metallic taste lingering on her tongue. Her breath hitched as she pushed herself up, the floorboards cold and sticky beneath her palms. "Elara?" She whispered into the settling quiet, the name hanging in the still air like an unanswered prayer. Elara stood motionless at the room's center, her stillness unnaturally absolute. Her eyes remained open, but something fundamental had shifted within them. The air carried a faint metallic tang, like old copper and static electricity. What had been mere exhaustion was now replaced by a hollow, vacant presence. They are ancient vessels, filled with a swirling storm of witnessed horrors now permanently housed within. Elara looks at Sarah, a faint, sad smile barely touching her lips. Her voice emerges as a dry rustle, layered with countless distant whispers. I remembered them, all of them. Finally, it was over. Now she was home. Elara pivoted slowly, her movements deliberate and weary. She settled into the worn armchair, the fabric cool and slightly damp against her skin. A faint scent of ozone lingered in the still air, a silent reminder of what had just transpired. She never moved again, becoming a living archive of terror, a monument to the fear that permeated those walls. The air carried the faint, metallic scent of old iron and the damp chill of forgotten corners. Sarah left the following week, the oppressive stillness of the place clinging to her like a second skin. Soon after, the house at 42 Maple Creek was purchased by an unsuspecting young couple. They reported no issues, except on perfectly still nights. If you passed by that window, you might glimpse her sitting in her chair. A faint, sweet scent of decay hangs in the air, and the glass feels unnaturally cold to the touch. And if you've just woken, heart hammering from a nightmare, you might feel a strange, profound relief, as if a terrible weight has been shared. The new couple laughed in their living room, unaware. Through that same window, in the dark study beyond, Elara's silhouette remained motionless in her chair. One pale eye slid open, catching the moonlight like a tarnished coin. Within that reflection flickered a monstrous shape, something not yet dreamed into being. So sleep well tonight. Dream whatever you want. She's remembering it for you. But ask yourself this final question. If all our nightmares are safe in her head, what happens when she finally falls asleep? A single, steady heartbeat pulsed through the darkness, then vanished into absolute silence. The sudden quiet felt thick and oppressive, like a physical weight pressing against the eardrums. A metallic scent, like cold iron and ozone, lingered in the air where the sound had been. Then, nothing. Just the absence where rhythm once lived, leaving only the memory of its pulse.
Like the journey? Subscribe and join the next expedition.